is a moment in January 1956 that changed everything. A 21-year-old walks onto a national television stage. He is from Tupelo, Mississippi, a town that most Americans couldn't place on a map. His family was so poor that when he was born, his father went to jail shortly after because he couldn't pay the debts. He grew up in a two-room house with no indoor plumbing. He wore hand-me-downs. He ate whatever there was. Now he is standing under the lights of the Dorsey Brothers stage show, in front of a camera that reaches millions of American living rooms. He opens his mouth, and the world tilts on its axis. Not because of his voice alone, though that voice was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. Not because of his looks, though those were impossible to ignore. But because of something underneath all of it. Something that came through the screen and grabbed people by the chest and wouldn't let go. It was authenticity. Raw, unfiltered, unapologetic self-expression. Elvis Aaron Presley didn't ask the world's permission to be who he was. He didn't sand down his edges to fit the format. He didn't wait for someone to tell him it was acceptable. He simply arrived, fully, completely, like a force of nature that had been building in the Mississippi Delta for years and finally found its outlet. Today, we are not here to reminisce about rock and roll. We are here to study something far more personal. The power of showing up as yourself, completely, in a world that is constantly asking you to be something safer, something quieter, something smaller. Elvis showed us what happens when you refuse. Elvis Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in a shotgun shack in East Tupelo, Mississippi. His twin brother, Jesse Garon, was stillborn. His mother, Gladys, poured every ounce of love she had into her surviving son, a love so fierce and complete that it became the bedrock of everything Elvis would ever do. They were desperately poor. Vernon Presley, his father, worked whatever jobs he could find, but money was always short and sometimes absent entirely. Elvis wore overalls to school when other kids wore regular clothes. He was quiet, polite, sensitive, and deeply aware of the gap between his family and the world he was growing up in. But here is what poverty could not touch, what Elvis heard. Tupelo sat at a crossroads. Gospel music poured out of the white churches on Sunday mornings, raw, emotional, spirit-filling. Blues music drifted from the black neighborhoods, earthly, aching, honest about suffering in a way that polished music never was. Country music told the stories of working people who had nothing to hide and nowhere to hide it. Bluegrass and rhythm and blues and the old hymns, all of it swirled around this quiet, watchful boy like a river gathering tributaries. Elvis didn't study music the way students study in classrooms. He absorbed it. He stood outside and listened. He sat in the front pew and felt it move through him. He watched the way music could transform a room, how a song could take a person out of their grief for 3 minutes and put them somewhere holy. Here is the first lesson. Your environment, even a hard one, is full of gifts if you are paying attention. We often look at difficult beginnings and see only the lack. Elvis looked at his and found a musical education that no university could have provided. The very poverty that embarrassed him as a child gave him access to musical traditions that the comfortable, protected children of privilege never touched. What have you been given in your struggle, in your particular geography of pain, that you have not yet recognized as a gift? In the summer of 1953, 18-year-old Elvis walked into Sun Studio in Memphis and paid $4 to record 2 songs as a personal record. A gift for his mother, he said. He was working as a truck driver. He had no connections in the music industry. He had no plan, exactly. But Marion Kiesker, the studio manager, noticed something. She wrote next to his name, "Good ballad singer. Hold." It took almost a year before Sam Phillips, the studio owner, called him back. In that time, Elvis kept driving his truck. He kept showing up. He kept practicing. He did not allow the silence from the industry to become the final word. When he finally recorded with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, the session wasn't going well. They had been trying different songs, proper, structured songs, and nothing was clicking. Then, during a break, Elvis started goofing around. He picked up his guitar and launched into an old blues number by Arthur Crudup, playing it loose, fast, joyful. The way he heard it in his bones, not the way he thought a recording artist was supposed to sound. Sam Phillips came out of the control room. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Just fooling around," Elvis said. "Well, back up. Find a place to start and do it again." That song, "That's All Right," became Elvis's first single. It was not the polished, careful performance of a man trying to meet expectations. It was the sound of a man forgetting to perform and simply being. Here is the second lesson. Your most powerful self often emerges not when you are trying hardest, but when you stop trying to be something other than what you are. How much of your energy right now is being spent performing a version of yourself that you think others want to see? How much of your creative power is being routed away from authenticity and toward approval? Elvis found his voice in a moment of play, of freedom, of forgetting the room. That is where the real work happens, not in the careful management of appearances, but in the unguarded moment when you simply let what's inside you out. When Elvis appeared on national television in 1956, America was not entirely ready for him. The country was still deeply segregated. The music he was blending, gospel, blues, country, rhythm, and blues, crossed lines that society had worked very hard to keep intact. He moved his body in ways that no white performer had moved on national television. He took his influences openly and honestly from black artists who had not been given the mainstream platforms they deserved. He didn't pretend otherwise or sanitize his origins. Ed Sullivan famously instructed his cameras to film Elvis only from the waist up during his appearance on the show, because the below-the-waist movement was considered too provocative for American living rooms. Critics called him dangerous. Preachers called him an instrument of moral decay. Newspapers ran editorials about the corruption of youth. Elvis kept moving. He did not defend himself endlessly. He did not collapse into apology. He did not reshape himself to fit the critique. He understood, at some deep inarticulate level, that the very thing they were attacking was the very thing that made him real, and that making it smaller to satisfy his critics would make him into nothing at all. Here is the third lesson. Criticism aimed at the most alive parts of you is often a sign that you are doing something right. The world has a powerful immune system. When something genuinely new arrives, something that doesn't fit the existing categories, the first response is almost always rejection. It was true for Elvis. It has been true for every artist, entrepreneur, thinker, and change-maker who ever mattered. The question is not whether you will face resistance. You will. The question is whether you will take that resistance as evidence that you should stop, or as confirmation that you have hit something real. Elvis hit something real. He kept moving. And within a year, the same culture that tried to film him from the waist up was calling him the king. By the early 1960s, Elvis faced a crisis that would have ended most careers. He had been drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958. His mother, the person he loved most in the world, died while he was in the service, a blow that affected him so profoundly that people who knew him said he was never quite the same afterward. When he came back from service in 1960, the world had moved. The Beatles had arrived. Dylan was redefining what popular music could say. The clean, slick Hollywood films Elvis was making were starting to feel like a safe, carefully managed version of the man who had once cracked the world open. Elvis knew it too. And in 1968, he did something that required enormous courage. He went back to the beginning. The '68 comeback special on NBC is one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of popular performance. Elvis walked out in black leather, stripped of the Hollywood machinery, the careful management, the formulaic product, and sat with a small group of musicians and just played. He joked. He forgot lyrics and laughed. He was visible, present, human. And the audience, watching, felt something shift. This was not the managed product. This was the man. The reviews were overwhelming. Critics, who had written him off, discovered they were wrong. The '68 special launched a second act that produced some of the most powerful performances of his career. Here is the fourth lesson. It is never too late to return to what is true about you. Life has a way of layering things over our original self. Success does it as surely as failure. Systems, expectations, routines, the demands of others, they accumulate like sediment over the living rock of who we actually are. Reinvention is not the invention of something new. It is the excavation of something real. Elvis didn't become something different in 1968. He remembered something essential. He stripped away what had accumulated and went back to the source. You have a source too. When did you last visit it? It would not be honest to tell Elvis's story without speaking about his pain. The same sensitivity that made him a great artist made the world difficult to live in. The same capacity for feeling that he channeled into his music left him vulnerable in private in ways that fame did not protect against. It made it worse. The isolation of superstardom, the inability to walk down a street or sit in a restaurant without being swarmed, the entourage that surrounded him and told him what he wanted to hear rather than what he needed to know. All of it exacted a cost. He struggled with prescription medications, with weight, with the slow erosion of a life that had been extraordinary, but that no longer belonged entirely to him. He died at 42. We acknowledge this not as a warning against ambition, but as a truth about the nature of enormous gifts. They are heavy. They demand as much as they give. And no amount of talent or achievement replaces the simple human need for genuine connection, honest counsel, and the freedom to be something other than your public legend. Here is the fifth lesson, and it is the most important. Your gift must be matched by your care for yourself. The same investment you make in your craft, your work, your performance, you must make in your inner life. In the relationships where you can be truthful. In the quiet where you can hear yourself think. In the moments away from the spotlight where you remember who you were before the world started defining you. Elvis's great tragedy was not that he burned out. It was that the systems around him, and perhaps the habits within him, did not protect the man behind the myth. Greatness without self-knowledge is a flame without a lantern. Brilliant, consuming, and ultimately unable to last. Elvis Presley sold over 1 billion records. He is, by many measures, still the best-selling solo music artist in history. He changed the sound, the look, and the cultural landscape of the 20th century. He took the music of the marginalized and brought it to the center of the world, not cleanly, not perfectly, not without complication, but with a force of personality and a depth of feeling that could not be manufactured or replicated. But the legacy that matters most is not the record sales. It is what he demonstrated about what is possible when a human being commits fully to their own authentic expression. A truck driver from Tupelo, a boy who grew up without a floor in his house that wasn't dirt. A young man who walked into a recording studio with $4 and no connections, and walked out having changed the world. Not because someone gave him permission, not because the path was clear or the reception was warm, but because something inside him refused, at the deepest level, the level beneath fear and doubt and the desire for approval, to be less than what he actually was. That refusal, that insistence on full, unapologetic self-expression, that is Elvis's real crown. And it is available to every one of us. You don't have to be a musician to live by it. You don't have to be famous or gifted in the conventional sense. You simply have to be willing to stop managing yourself so carefully, to stop performing the acceptable version and start expressing the real one, to walk into the room, whatever your room is, and let what is actually inside you come out. The world has enough careful, managed, strategic self-presentation. It is desperately short of people who are simply, fully, dangerously themselves. Be that. Pick up your guitar. Step into your spotlight. Start fooling around, and don't stop.